On March 6, 2016, a man walking along the Mapocho River in Chile made a horrifying discovery. He stumbled upon a black trash bag and noticed that a hand was sticking out of it. He quickly called the police, and when officers arrived at the scene, they opened the bag and realized that there weren't just one, but two hands, and along with them, there were also two legs. The police assumed that the limbs belonged to a woman due to their size, the design of the nails on both the hands and feet, and some bracelets that were on the victim. They attempted to identify her by taking her hand and lifting fingerprints, which they then took to the National Registry. However, there were no matches in the Chilean National Registry database. This led them to think that the hands and legs might belong to a foreigner. Officers took photographs of the manicure, pedicure, and some of the woman's tattoos. This was done in the hope that someone might recognize her. The next day, more remains were found. Other people who were also passing by the river discovered two bags, inside of which were the victim's torso and head. Due to the matching cuts on the torso, hands, and legs, it was determined that all the parts belonged to the same person. The officers were now hopeful that having the entire body would make identifying her easier. However, identification was made possible thanks to the victim's nails. The person who had done the manicure came forward and identified her work. A Colombian manicurist contacted the police, stating that she had done that specific nail design for a girl who was also from Colombia. She told them that the girl's name was Juliana. Though she didn't know much about her, she was able to tell the officers where Juliana worked. The officers went to the girl's workplace, and when they showed her boss the photograph, he confirmed that he did know her and that she worked for him. The girl was identified as Juliana Acevedo, 21 years old, originally from Colombia. Her boss mentioned that she hadn't shown up to work for a few days, but he hadn't been worried since he thought she might have been sick or had some urgent matters to attend to. Nothing serious enough to report her missing. Juliana had a contract with the workplace that included her address, which was an apartment building. The police went to that address to find out what had happened. They also needed to learn who this girl was and how she ended up in Chile. Gradually, the details of her life began to emerge. Juliana Acevedo was born in 1995 in Valle del Cauca, Colombia. She was the youngest of 5 brothers and 3 sisters. Her family always struggled financially. Her father, Andrés, left them just a few months after she was born, so her mother had to take on all the household expenses, which made things even more difficult. Juliana graduated from high school in 2014, and her dream was to go to university. But the problem was, her family didn't have enough money to support her in that pursuit, so she had to start working and give up on those dreams because in the end, she needed to help around the house to make sure they didn't lose everything. In August 2015, Juliana began a relationship with 24-year-old Edwin Vasquez, who was the son of a well-known teacher in the village. On top of that, his father owned a funeral home where Edwin had worked for most of his life. Edwin lived with his mother, stepfather, and sister since his parents had separated when he was very young. It was also known that in the village, Edwin took on different jobs. He didn't have a specific profession. He did a little bit of everything to make money. 4 months after starting their relationship, the couple decided to move to Chile. They had a few friends who had moved there, and honestly, they were doing quite well, so they thought things would work out for them too. Juliana hoped to get into university and help her mother, who was elderly by then and still had many expenses. On top of that, Juliana had several brothers and sisters, as we already know, and they had children. They weren't in the best financial situation either. In the end, Juliana just wanted her family to be happy and never to want for anything. In November 2015, the couple arrived in Chile. At first, they lived in a kind of slum while they looked for work. Once they both settled into good jobs and started earning enough money, they moved together into an apartment building. During these months, Juliana told her family that everything was going well. She and Edwin both had jobs. She even sent them some money, and said they could now count on her for support. It's also worth mentioning that Edwin had a son from another relationship whom he had left behind in his village in Colombia. So, he also had to provide for his little boy. Juliana reassured her sisters and mother that everything was fine, but after a few months, she confided in one of her sisters that Edwin had become very jealous and that she feared he might become violent. Her sister advised her to seek help from the church in Chile and ask for assistance from the local community, but Juliana apparently didn't take her advice and continued living with Edwin until their relationship ended with the discovery of her dismembered body in the river. When the police arrived at the apartment building where the couple lived and started questioning the neighbors, they were told that the two had been living there for several months and that they weren't a very stable couple. According to the neighbors, there were frequent fights between them, not just inside the apartment, but even outside by the front door. They described Edwin as a possessive and controlling man. One time, Juliana gave her phone to a neighbor, asking her to keep it in her house, explaining that Edwin often checked her phone, which led to arguments. The neighbors also mentioned that on Sunday, March 5th, the day before the remains were discovered, loud music was blasting from the couple's apartment. And after that day, they didn't see Juliana again, though they did notice Edwin coming and going several times over the weekend and in the following days. The police searched for Edwin at his workplace, but he wasn't there. So, they decided to wait for him at their apartment. When Edwin finally returned, he voluntarily turned himself into the police. It was also revealed that, during this time, he confessed to being the one who had killed Juliana. While all this was happening, Juliana's family found out about her murder not through the police, but through social media. As I mentioned earlier, photographs of Juliana's hands and feet had been taken when her limbs were discovered, and these photos spread far and wide, even reaching Colombia. Her friends, who saw them, didn't know what kind of manicure she had at the time, but they noticed one important detail: a tattoo on her ankle with her nephew's name. They quickly notified her family, and that's how they learned what had happened. Seeing the tattoo and all the news coming out of Chile, they suspected that the murdered girl was Juliana. This was later confirmed when Chilean news reported the girl's identity. At the time, Juliana's family said they didn't have enough money to bring her body back from Chile to Colombia, so they began asking the media in their country for help, as well as the Chilean consulate. It was the consulate staff who eventually started the process of repatriating Juliana's body. On March 15, 2016, Juliana's body was brought back to her native Colombia, and on the 17th, her neighbors and relatives gathered to say their goodbyes. Around 500 people attended the funeral since her family was well known and loved in the area. During this time, Edwin confessed everything to the police. He even went so far as to say that their relationship was abusive and admitted to hitting Juliana several times, not just at home, but also in public. He also revealed that he kept her under strict control, often waiting outside her workplace to watch what she did during her free time. Edwin didn't want her to have relationships with anyone else and frequently forbade her from contacting her family. This was confirmed when officers spoke to Juliana's family, who said they hadn't heard from her since the end of January and couldn't get in touch with her at all. Edwin shared all of this very calmly. It seemed as if he didn't feel he had done anything wrong. There wasn't even the slightest hint of remorse in his voice. He described everything that happened on March 5, 2016, in the apartment he and Juliana shared. According to him, on that day, Juliana had been talking to someone at work, which greatly upset him. When they got home at 5 p.m., they began arguing. The fight escalated, and Edwin started hitting Juliana. After that, Edwin strangled her, which the autopsy confirmed. Additionally, the examination showed that the cuts were very precise, raising many questions for the police. How could this man have made such clean cuts? Edwin then continued his story, explaining that after he killed her, he took her to the bathroom, grabbed a butcher knife, and started cutting her body. He said he sprinkled salt on the wounds and made several plugs to prevent too much blood from leaking out of Juliana's body. Afterward, he packed the body parts into various bags. He made 2 trips, one on the night of Juliana's murder, during which he disposed of the limbs, and another where he got rid of the torso and head. These 2 trips were made by taxi, and during the rides, he had placed the bags inside a suitcase they had. An analysis conducted in the couple's apartment confirmed suspicions. Thanks to luminol, various bloodstains were discovered. Additionally, the same suitcase I mentioned earlier was found to contain traces of blood, which, when tested, came back positive for Juliana's DNA. Now, Edwin revealed the details everyone had been waiting for, how he managed to make such precise cuts. Initially, officers believed he had an accomplice, but he denied this, claiming he had been able to make such clean cuts due to certain skills he had acquired. Edwin had assisted his father in the funeral business his father owned. Moreover, back in Colombia, he worked with the rural police. The rural police, which are not technically part of the Colombian Armed Forces or the Colombian police, are more like a local group formed by residents to oversee villages and areas where crime is believed to be high and where the regular police don't work as effectively. So, it was through this group, as well as from his job at the funeral parlor, that he learned how to use tools and cut different body parts. With this confession, he was charged with Juliana's murder and sent to prison while awaiting trial. The entire investigation lasted 9 months, and the trial began in 2017. Edwin's defense team pushed for him to be charged with simple murder, which would have resulted in a sentence of 5 to 10 years, while the prosecution demanded 20 years. They sought to classify the crime as femicide, based on the relationship between Edwin and Juliana, as well as the fact that they had lived together. Under Chilean law, for a crime to be classified as femicide, the couple must have lived together, which was proven through their lease agreement and 2 work contracts that listed the same address. After all the proceedings related to this case, Edwin was found guilty and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. It was said that 6 years were deducted due to the fact that he cooperated with the police during interrogation. He told the truth and surrendered without resistance, so all of this was considered mitigating factors for his punishment. Edwin will serve his sentence in Chile, and once he is released, he will be required to return to Colombia. But what do you think? Was Edwin's punishment fair for the crime he committed? Leave your answers in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, hit the like button, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and we'll see each other again soon.